The warning came through the comms at 3:17 Standard Time, broken, shaky, and nearly drowned out by static. A small research outpost on the edge of human-claimed space had gone silent. No emergency beacon, no distress call, just a sudden drop off the grid. At first, Command thought it was a power failure or a meteor strike. Outposts that far from Earth often dealt with system glitches, but this felt different. Patrol logs showed a quick flash of energy right before the silence, like something had torn the sky open for a split second, and then nothing. The nearest patrol ship was rerouted to investigate. Its crew expected a routine rescue. What they found instead didn't feel like any kind of accident. The landing pads were scorched. The main habitat dome was cracked open from the outside, clean cuts, too precise to be natural. Even the supply crates were untouched, as if the attackers only cared about people. The patrol team swept the halls in silence, knowing deep down that whatever had hit this human outpost wasn't just passing through. It had come with a purpose. In the center of the command room, they found the last recording. A single line, spoken by a terrified voice. "They're not here to talk. They're here to erase us." The message stopped there, cutting off mid-breath. No visuals, no fight, just a final warning. The patrol team left the site with a feeling that the outpost hadn't been the target, it had been the message. When news reached Earth, the reaction wasn't fear, it was anger. Humanity had spent decades building a place in the stars slowly, carefully, trying not to repeat the mistakes of old wars. The idea that something had chosen to attack without reason struck deep. Leaders met behind closed doors. Military analysts studied the damage. Linguists dug through intercepted signals. And somewhere in that chaos, one fact became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The unknown species had been watching humans for a long time, waiting for a moment to strike. A task force was formed, made up of the best pilots, strategists, and scientists Earth had. Their mission wasn't revenge, it was survival. If a civilization bold enough to strike first was out there, humanity needed answers. They needed to know how powerful the enemy was, what they wanted, and whether they planned to hit again. Every scan, every decoded message, every recovered fragment pointed to one chilling truth. The attackers believed humans were a rising threat, and they wanted to shut that threat down before it could grow. The task force followed the trail into deep space, crossing sectors few humans had ever seen. Strange ruins, burned-out stations, abandoned listening posts, each one marked the path of a species that had wiped out others long before daring to face Earth. But as the team got closer to the enemy's territory, they began to realize something even more unsettling. The attackers hadn't vanished after the outpost strike. They were preparing for something bigger, something meant to end the conflict before it could truly begin. And then, on the edge of a dying star system, the task force picked up a signal, a massive fleet forming, an entire homeworld mobilizing for war. What they discovered next changed everything and forced Earth into a decision that would shake the galaxy. The signal wasn't just a random transmission drifting through space. It carried structured layers of coded bursts, rhythmic pulses, and an underlying hum that felt almost intentional. The task force analysts listened to it again and again, trying to match it with any known language. Nothing came close. It was older, harsher, almost like it had been designed for throats and vocal cords humans didn't have. Still, there was a pattern, and patterns meant intelligence. Patterns meant purpose, and that was enough to keep everyone on edge. The fleet they detected around the enemy homeworld wasn't the kind built for short raids or border skirmishes. These ships were massive, shaped like armored crescents, dark and heavy. Their energy signatures showed weapons far beyond anything humans had seen before. It was clear they weren't preparing for negotiations, they were preparing for an ending. The question was who's back on Earth. Fear settled into the quiet places, command rooms, small-town living rooms, late-night broadcasts trying to stay calm while the truth hung in the air like a storm cloud. People argued about what should happen next. Some wanted to fortify the borders and avoid provoking a larger war. Others insisted humanity had already been marked, and waiting would only make things worse. But no matter the debate, one thing united them all. The outpost attack had changed everything. Within the task force, tensions ran just as high. The crew knew they were facing something that didn't think the way humans did. These attackers hadn't sent warnings or demands. They hadn't tried to claim territory or bargain for resources. They had moved silently, hit hard, and vanished as if the attack were nothing more than a routine task. It made the enemy feel distant, cold, almost mechanical in their intent. One of the senior officers pointed out a disturbing detail. Every ruined station they passed on their way deeper into hostile space belonged to a species humanity had never met before. It meant the enemy had been destroying civilizations long before Earth entered the picture. They weren't reacting to humanity, they were continuing a pattern, and Earth had simply become the next target on their list. The scientists aboard the task force ship tried to find clues in the damage. Each destroyed settlement told a similar story. Precise strikes, minimal remains, no signs of prolonged battle. Whatever this species wanted, they took it quickly. Whatever they didn't want, they erased. It was a strategy designed to leave nothing behind, not even warnings for the next victims. Despite the danger, the team pressed on. They had to know how close the enemy was to launching a larger attack. They had to understand why humanity had been chosen now, after decades of peaceful growth. And deep down, many wanted to know whether Earth had done something intentionally or not that triggered this unstoppable chain. The closer they got to the homeworld, the more the silence grew heavy. Even space itself felt different, as if watching them. Strange energy fields flickered on their scanners. Their ship lights dimmed unexpectedly, only to surge back seconds later. Something was interfering with their systems, something vast and unnatural. Then the signal changed again. The rhythmic pulses sharpened, the bursts grew faster, the coded hum deepened into something that felt almost like a heartbeat. The analysts stared wide-eyed as they realized the truth. The signal wasn't random at all. It was tracking them, following them, studying them. And when the final pulse echoed through the ship, everyone froze, because this time, buried inside the static and alien language, there was a single translated word, clear, unmistakable, and meant only for humans. Prepare. The word lingered in the air long after the signal faded, echoing through the ship like a warning no one knew how to answer. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It felt like the enemy wasn't just aware of them, they were waiting for them, tracking them, studying every move the task force made as if they were already inside some invisible radius that no human had ever crossed and lived to talk about. Command back on Earth wanted updates every hour, but even they didn't know what to do with the new information. Some leaders believed the message meant the hostile species wanted to negotiate before a full conflict began. Others argued it was the kind of warning a predator gave prey before the final strike. The tension on Earth mirrored the tension on the ship, creating a quiet fear nobody dared to fully speak out loud. As the task force pushed forward, internal divisions began to show. A group within the crew believed they should gather as much data as possible and return home while they still could. Another faction insisted that retreating now would leave Earth vulnerable and blind. The debate grew sharper with every new anomaly. They encountered energy waves that distorted readings, drifting debris that moved almost as if guided, and flashes on distant scanners hinting that something massive was always just out of sight. Meanwhile, the science team uncovered something unsettling. The coded hum beneath the signal wasn't random noise at all, it carried emotional tones. Not emotions like humans knew, but fluctuations suggesting caution, calculation, and something that could almost be interpreted as recognition. It meant the enemy understood more about humans than anyone realized. Maybe they had been observing for years. Maybe they had been waiting for a specific moment. One of the analysts brought up an old theory about hostile civilizations. Some species didn't attack for resources or survival, but to maintain control over regions of space. They acted like silent guardians of boundaries that only they understood. If humans crossed one of those invisible lines, even without knowing it, the response might be automatic. The attack on the outpost could have been a punishment, or a test. The deeper the crew traveled, the more it felt like they were walking straight into someone else's territory, someone who did not appreciate uninvited guests. Their long-range sensors picked up strange mechanical structures drifting near asteroids. Some looked abandoned, others pulsed faint traces of energy, like they were still listening. Every time their ship drew too close, the same signal would spike again, repeating that single word, prepare. On Earth, fear quietly grew into pressure. Civilians demanded answers. Governments issued calm statements while scrambling behind the scenes. Ships were moved into defensive positions. Old military protocols were dusted off. Even peaceful colonies far from the conflict began drilling for emergency evacuations. It didn't matter that no further attack had happened yet. The feeling of being watched spread across the entire human network, and still, no one knew what the enemy wanted. Then one night, as the task force crossed a region marked by fading blue light from a collapsed star, the ship's lights flickered again, but this time they stayed dim. The engines hummed strangely, as if restrained by something outside. Every monitor froze at once, glitching, then settling into a single image, a dark shape rising through static, slowly forming, almost like a face or whatever passed for one among the attackers. No words came through, no explanation, just that silent, watching presence staring directly at them, unblinking. And then the image vanished. The ship returned to normal, but no one spoke. They all felt the same thing. The enemy hadn't just found them, they had made contact, and whatever came next was already in motion. The days that followed felt endless. The task force pushed deeper into hostile space, each light year stretching like an eternity. Every system they scanned, every derelict station they passed, added layers of unease rather than clarity. The strange energy fields continued to distort their instruments. Even the ship's most advanced sensors struggled to track anything beyond the immediate zone. Yet the signal persisted, pulsing faintly at intervals, growing sharper the closer they approached the enemy homeworld. The single word that haunted them, prepare, was repeated in subtle ways, embedded in the rhythm of the pulses, as if the unknown species were taunting them. letting humans know they had already been observed and understood. Tensions aboard the ship ran higher than ever. Minor mistakes became major points of conflict. Officers argued over strategy. Analysts debated the meaning of every flicker in the signals, and pilots grew restless, itching to take action yet constrained by orders. Sleep became scarce, anxiety rising with each pulse that reminded them the enemy wasn't waiting passively. They were calculating. They were ready. The science team continued to dig through the layers of encoded signals, desperate for clues. One researcher noticed a repeating pattern beneath the main pulse's tiny variations that seemed almost like coordinates or vectors. If humans were to survive, they had to figure out whether these were warnings, traps, or something far worse. Every theory pointed toward the same terrifying possibility. The attackers weren't just hunting humans for sport, they were preparing for a decisive strike. One misstep could trigger a chain of events from which Earth might never recover. Meanwhile, Earth itself was on edge. Civilian broadcasts were quiet, but behind the scenes, military fleets shifted into high alert, and emergency plans were put into action. Publicly, leaders insisted humanity was strong, prepared, and capable of defending itself. Privately, many feared the unknown. The attack on the outpost had already proven how precise, methodical, and unstoppable this species could be. Commanders ran simulations, attempting to predict every possible move, but the data always returned gaps too wide to trust. Humanity was up against something it had never faced before, an enemy whose motives, technology, and limits were entirely unknowable. On the ship, whispers spread among the crew. Some suggested turning back, retreating to human space to regroup, to warn Earth. Others argued that pulling out now would only make the species more confident, emboldened by humanity's caution. The lines between duty, fear, and survival blurred. Even the captain struggled to hold control, forced to make impossible decisions while every instinct screamed that the enemy was closer than they could imagine. Then, one morning, the sensors lit up with a massive energy signature. Hundreds of ships had appeared on the edge of the system, spread across the dark expanse like predators surrounding prey. They moved deliberately, slowly closing in, maintaining formation as if testing the humans' reactions. The task force crew could feel the tension ripple through every deck. Communication lines hummed with static. Every instrument tracked movement with painstaking precision. But the deeper truth was undeniable. They were being herded, guided towards something unseen. The signal pulsed once more, louder and sharper than ever. This time it carried an urgency that everyone could feel, a vibration that resonated in the hull, in the air, and in their minds. No one knew what would happen next. Every calculation, every strategy, every instinct pointed to one fact. The confrontation humanity had feared was finally unavoidable. The edge of war was not approaching. It was already there. And somewhere beyond the veil of dark space, the enemy waited. The crew barely had time to catch their breath before the unexpected happened. Just as the fleet of enemy ships seemed poised to engage, a blinding flash erupted on the edge of their scanners. The energy signature wasn't coming from the attackers. It was coming from deep within the enemy homeworld itself. The planet, thought to be a solid, unyielding mass, suddenly emitted a pulse so massive it pushed the task force's instruments to the brink. The planet itself seemed alive, or at least weaponized. And for the first time, everyone realized the enemy had a weapon far beyond anything humans had imagined. Panic surged through the crew, tempered only by training in the sense that they couldn't retreat in it without condemning Earth. Analysts scrambled to interpret the data. The pulse appeared to carry intent, like a signal woven into destructive energy. But what did it mean? Was it a defensive measure, a trap, or the first stage of an attack against the humans? The thought made every officer uneasy. The stakes had suddenly escalated far beyond a fleet versus fleet confrontation. They were facing a civilization whose planet itself was part of the arsenal. Amid the rising tension, an even stranger anomaly appeared on long-range scanners, a second fleet human in design, but unrecognized by the task force. The ship identifiers were scrambled, the hull designs alien to Earth's records, yet unmistakably humanoid. Communications attempts failed. Whoever or whatever these ships were, they were moving toward the enemy planet as if drawn by the same force guiding the task force. The analysts speculated that it could be a rogue human faction, an experimental AI-controlled fleet, or something even more unsettling, humans from the future, somehow intervening. The implications were staggering. If another human presence existed in enemy space, it could either save them or trigger a chain reaction the entire galaxy would regret. The crew's fear was compounded when the alien fleet responded to the new arrivals. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, their formation shifted subtly, and sensors detected strange energy pulses, almost like a warning but not directed at the task force. For a moment, the humans watching the scene could almost sense the strategy unfolding. The enemy wasn't reckless. They were calculating, observing multiple human movements at once. Every choice the task force made now mattered exponentially more than before. Then, the first signs of sabotage hit the ship. Systems began failing in unpredictable ways. Navigation, communication arrays, even life support flickered. It wasn't a natural malfunction. Something, or someone, was actively interfering with their vessel. Panic threatened to take hold, but the captain held firm, knowing that fear would only make mistakes more deadly. Crew members worked frantically to isolate the source, all while the pulsing energy from the enemy planet grew stronger. The mysterious Second Fleet drew nearer, and the alien ships shifted like predators preparing to strike. In the midst of the chaos, a single realization struck the crew. The enemy wasn't just targeting humanity, they were targeting all forces capable of disrupting their control. The outpost attack had been a small warning. The fleet they faced now, and the weaponized planet, made clear that humanity was not the only piece on the chessboard, and the unknown Second Fleet was just another variable the enemy had anticipated. As the task force braced for what felt like the inevitable first strike, the planet pulsed again, brighter this time, shaking the very space around them. Every human on board could feel the magnitude of what they were up against. The enemy wasn't waiting anymore. They were initiating the next phase. And in that moment, every crew member realized the true battle had only just begun. The task force had no time to react as the energy pulse from the enemy homeworld erupted again, this time shaking their hulls violently and sending shockwaves across space. The fleet of alien ships began closing in, weapons systems glowing with an ominous red light, ready to annihilate anything in their path. Every crew member gripped their stations, adrenaline spiking as the captain barked orders, desperate to keep the ship intact. For a moment it seemed like humanity's presence in that system would be erased in seconds. Then the unexpected happened. The mysterious Second Fleet, the one humanity couldn't identify, launched a coordinated strike. Their weapons, advanced yet strangely familiar, tore through the outermost enemy vessels with precision that stunned everyone. It wasn't just firepower, they seemed to know exactly how to bypass shields and hit weak points. The task force realized with a shock that these weren't merely allies, they were humans, genetically and technologically enhanced beyond anything Earth currently possessed. Their sudden intervention changed the dynamic entirely, creating chaos among the enemy fleet. The energy pulse from the planet intensified again, but this time, it faltered. The attackers had not anticipated a second human force working in perfect synchronization with the task force. Sensors indicated structural stress across the homeworld's orbital defenses. Using this moment, the captain made a bold decision. The task force would move into attack formation, targeting the planet's core energy conduits. Every ship's weapons fired in unison, striking precise points identified by the science team's calculations. The alien fleet tried to respond, but the second human fleet covered their flanks, giving the task force a window they had never imagined possible. In the midst of the chaos, communications from Earth came through, a message of defiance, a unified human signal broadcast across multiple frequencies. It wasn't a demand, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a declaration. Humanity would not be destroyed without a fight. The combination of coordinated fleets and the resolute message seemed to shake the enemy. For the first time, the attackers hesitated, their movements uncertain, as if struggling to recalibrate against a species they had underestimated. Then, the critical strike hit. The planet's energy core erupted in a controlled chain reaction, not enough to destroy the world entirely, but enough to neutralize the weaponized pulse and cripple orbital defenses. The enemy fleet, caught between the task force and the second human fleet, began retreating in disarray. Victory, however fragile, belonged to humanity, but it came at a cost. Several ships were lost, crew members injured, and the psychological weight of facing an almost unstoppable enemy left everyone shaken. Just as relief began to settle, the final twist struck. The science team discovered a hidden message embedded deep within the enemy's signal, overlooked in the chaos. It was not a warning, not a command, it was a map leading to other worlds the attackers controlled, worlds that had never been touched, worlds with secrets that could tip the balance of the galaxy. The implication was terrifying. The outpost attack, the fleet, the weaponized planet, it had all been a test, a way to measure humanity's capabilities. And now that humans had passed, the real challenge was only beginning. The task force and the second fleet regrouped, battered but alive, staring at the map with a mix of dread and determination. Earth had survived the first strike, but the universe was vast, and humanity's enemies were more calculating, more relentless than anyone could have imagined. And somewhere, in the dark beyond the stars, the true test of humanity's resilience had just begun. The silence after the battle was almost deafening. The enemy fleet had retreated, the weaponized planet lay dormant, and the task force floated among the debris of what had been a near impossible fight for survival. For the first time in days, humans aboard the ships allowed themselves to breathe, to feel the weight of what they had endured. Every crew member knew they had faced extinction and survived, not through sheer luck, but through courage, cooperation, and the unyielding determination that defined humanity. Back on Earth, news of the engagement spread slowly, first through military channels, then carefully to the public. People watched as images of the battered task force ships returned, accompanied by messages of resilience and unity. Civilians, leaders, scientists, and soldiers all recognized the truth they had long suspected but never faced so directly. Humanity was capable of defending itself against forces far beyond what anyone had imagined. The attack on the outpost had been a shock, but it had also ignited a spark. Humanity had learned to fight not just for survival, but for its place in the universe. The Second Fleet, the mysterious human force that had intervened, stayed long enough to help stabilize the task force before vanishing into the darkness of deep space. Questions about their origins and technology remained unanswered. Were they a secret program from the future? A lost human colony that had evolved independently? The task force knew they might never get the full story, but the alliance, however brief, had saved countless lives, and that was enough for now. The surviving crew spent weeks repairing their ships, salvaging what they could from destroyed vessels, and analyzing the data recovered from the enemy homeworld. The map embedded in the enemy's signals was carefully studied, revealing a network of systems that suggested the attackers were not isolated but part of a larger, organized civilization. Humanity now understood that the first strike had been a test, a way to gauge how far humans could push back. Passing that test had bought time, but it had also shown that the galaxy held many more challenges yet to come. As the task force prepared to return to Earth, a quiet reflection settled over the crew. The outpost attack, the fleet, the weaponized planet Eat had all forced humans to confront fear, make impossible decisions, and rely on one another in ways they had never imagined. Personal rivalries had been set aside, courage had risen from ordinary people, and teamwork had proven stronger than any technology alone. Humanity had survived not because of superior firepower, but because of resilience, intelligence, and the refusal to surrender in the face of the unknown. The final reports sent to Earth emphasized these lessons. Humanity had survived a near-certain annihilation because of unity, adaptability, and resolve. But the map remained a reminder that survival was only the beginning. Other worlds awaited, other challenges loomed, and the universe was far from conquered. Humanity had passed its first test, but the story of survival, discovery, and growth was only just beginning. As the task force ships slipped back into familiar space, Earth coming into view like a blue and green jewel in the void, there was a quiet sense of hope. Humanity had faced the impossible, proven it could endure, and emerged stronger. And while the enemies lurking beyond the stars remained a threat, one truth was undeniable. Humans had learned to fight, to survive, and to rise. The galaxy had tested them, and humanity had answered not with fear, but with courage. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and waiting. And the task force understood that their journey, and the story of humanity itself, was far from over.